after about 10 years and moved to Kandala. We've lived for about the last 5 years. So I'm from here and I kind of expect to die here. This is my community. I feel very much part of it. I'm very involved with the community, with the schools, with Kandala Arts Theatre. So this, I feel a sense of, I don't know why I feel a sense of connection to the hills and the mountains and the birds, and this is where I feel at home. So I'm standing for Ōhāriu because it is my community and because I love this place. So I have two little children over there. They're 9 and 11. Before they came along, I went to Victoria University. I studied psychology and economics, but mostly I studied philosophy, in particular ethics. Now, people who haven't done philosophy sometimes have this stereotype that what philosophers do is spend a lot of time contemplating the meaning of life. And when people come and study philosophy, I think they're sometimes kind of disappointed that it never actually gets discussed. So when I was there, I think that the philosophy department kind of caved a bit, and we did a little module on the meaning of life. And one of my lecturers started off by saying, "What do you all think the meaning of life is?" And because I was one of those people who sat in the front row and raised my hand a lot, I was sitting in the front row and I raised my hand. And I said, it probably sounds a little bit cheesy, but I think that the meaning of life is to leave the world in a better place than you found it. And he didn't think that was cheesy, he thought it was quite nice. Unfortunately, if you are someone who thinks that that is the meaning of life, this is not necessarily the greatest time to strive for that goal. You know, we know there are some things that are not heading in the right direction. I'm thinking obviously about climate change, water quality, species loss, housing prices, wealth inequality. I think my children are probably going to be okay because I've had the kind of life where I've been very lucky and in a position where I'm going to have something to hand down to them. But there are an awful lot of children who are not in that position and don't have any way of getting into that position. I've been doing a lot, particularly during lockdown, where we couldn't do our normal sort of getting out and meeting people. Been making a lot of videos. Has anyone seen the Johnny Lego video with? So I made a video about abatement rates and how our welfare system is designed, well, it may not be intended to trap people in poverty, but it does trap people in poverty. And that really struck a chord with some people. Sort of 120,000 people have seen it just through thousands of people sharing it. And because of that, a lot of people from around the country have got in touch with me. And some of their stories are very, very moving. Some of the things that are distressing is seeing people message me trying to tell their story, but their literacy is so poor that they're not able, I can't understand what they're trying to say. That I find really, really upsetting and sad. One message, this young man said, this is so sweet, "Honestly, I'll support you if you become Prime Minister. You know about the struggles people like me face, and I love to see someone help make a real change. I struggle financially to the point I've given up and I'm only 20. But I've worked since I was 16, and even though it made me, I've never been able to get out of poverty. Thanks for shedding light on important situations." And this 20-year-old who has given up, his profile picture is of him holding a baby. And I think, what is it like to be a 20-year-old who has given up? And what is it like to be the child whose dad is 20 and has given up? And I'm not okay with being in a country where there are 20-year-olds who have given up. I find that absolutely appalling. You know, my children have their struggles, everyone has their struggles, but I never have to worry that they're not going to have enough food. I never have to worry that they're going to be cold or not being able to get medical attention when they need it. I don't have to worry about that. And when I think about those parents who are just like me, with children just like mine, who have to worry about that, who will be listening to their children wheezing in the night, knowing that they are likely to get diseases like rheumatic fever that have no place in New Zealand, that as a parent, those parents' life expectancy is shortened because of diseases like that their children's life expectancies are going to be shortened by diseases like that. I'm not okay with it. And the reason I'm not okay with it is, you know, there are problems that are hard to solve in this world, but there are a lot of problems that are easy. And at the moment, we have amazing tools to fix so many of these problems, and we are leaving them in the toolbox. And the reason they're being left in the toolbox, I believe, is because of a lack of courage of our political parties and our politicians. If something can't be expressed in a soundbite, if there's a focus group that doesn't like the sound of something, then they're not going to do it. So there are problems that are hard to solve, but there are problems that are easy to solve. And you know, even for the ones that are really hard to solve, I would really just like to see us moving in the right direction. And at the moment, for a lot of these problems, we're not, and I'm not okay with it. And I don't think any of you should be either. So the question I'll be asking people this election is, what do you want from the next 3 years? What do you want for your children, for your grandchildren? Do you want to aim for things to be slightly less terrible for some people? Or do you want this country to be what it could be? Not just for people like me who are doing all right, but this 20-year-old who's given up on his child. Because we can do things better. We can have clean air, and we can have clean water, and we can deal with our emissions, and we can do that while thriving economically. It is possible. We know how to do it. The people in Parliament know how to do it. So let's just do it already. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Oh no, I'll put you up for the questions there at the end. So, unfortunately, you're stuck with me now, but you will have Jess back for the questions. So I'm just going to talk you through TOP's focus for 2020 in terms of our policies and messages, that sort of stuff, and then I'll get Jess back up here, and you'll be able to ask questions about our policy platform or about local issues, all of that sort of stuff. Questions to Jess and myself. Big round of applause once more for Jess Hammond. You can see now why we've gone all in on Ōhāriu. This is our target electorate. So we are targeting this place to win. And if you're inspired after tonight, Jess will tell you where you can sign up to help out, because we think we can win this place. And of course that then guarantees us a seat in Parliament, or several, depending on how much of a party vote we get. So I'm just going to introduce myself, and then, like I said, I'll take you through our platform. My name's Jeff. I'm the leader of TOP, and I have been an economist for most of my life. Much like Jess described, I've worked on solutions to our biggest problems, only to watch career politicians throw those in the too hard basket. And Jess has really neatly set out the issues that we face as a country, so I won't rehash all of that. What I will say though is that Aotearoa New Zealand is an incredible place, despite all these issues that we have. You know, I really believe that we are a nation of pioneers, of explorers and innovators. I mean, we are the most distant landmass that got colonised. It's truly an incredible story, the story of the Polynesian voyage to come here. If you don't know much about it, Matariki's a great time to check it out. we were the first to give women the vote. Most of you know that story. We, were the first to go nuclear free. We have lots of incredible stories that show what happens when people are given a fair go. A beekeeper went on to be the first to climb the world's highest mountain. A Kiwi beekeeper. So we can do amazing things when we have that equality of opportunity, when people do have a decent crack in life. The trouble is that we are missing out on that right now. And the causes for that are many, but for a lot of us, they really start in housing. And I'll talk a bit about that. We're a nation where it's easier to make money speculating on property than it is through starting a business. And that is why we have some of the highest house prices in the world, and that feeds through to all of the sorts of social issues that Jessica was talking about. Some of the highest teen suicide rates in the world, the second highest incarceration rates. We have some of the biggest gaps between rich and poor in terms of educational outcomes in the OECD. Child growing up in a poor household in New Zealand turns up to school on their first day 2 years behind their classmates developmentally. 2 years, 40% of their life. And our school system, our teachers work bloody hard on the smell of an oily rag to try and close that gap. But all they can do, the best they can do is maintain it. So just imagine what it would have been like sitting sitting bursary or NCEA level 3 or UE, whatever it was when you were there, when you were 17. Imagine sitting that at age 15. Because that's exactly what we ask the bottom 20% of our society to do. And then we wonder why they don't take up fees-free university. It's because they can't get in. So these sorts of issues track right back to early childhood, and that's really what TOP is all about. It's about catching these issues early, dealing to them early, and so that everyone has a decent start in life. And it's, as Jessica so eloquently said, it's better for us economically, and it's better for us socially. As well as all of these social challenges, millennials are the first generation to be worse off than their parents on every measure, except height. You'll take that? Yeah. I'll take it. Nice. So, and on top of that, we expect them to deal with climate change, water quality, loss of native species, all of these challenges that are coming in years to come. So, TOP believes in equality of opportunity. So does Labour, so does National. They all say the same thing. Everyone needs a decent start in life, a fair go. The difference with TOP is that we think it's going to take real change for that equality of opportunity to exist. And we have the skills and the ideas to make that happen. You've already met Jessica, experienced public servant. We've got a lawyer, we've got a small business person, we've got scientists in our top few candidates. I'm an economist. Who do you want sitting around the cabinet table after September 19th, making some of the biggest investments that you're going to see in the next decade, probably two? It's a massive, massive election. So, I will crack on, but the point is that this is why we have the slogan, "Don't leave change to chance," because we believe that a vote for any other party is leaving change to chance. Only TOP has the skills, the policies, and the will to make the real changes that are needed. So, these are the priorities that I'll be talking through in the next few minutes. First up, affordable housing and rent. Let's call it, our housing market is a hot, sticky mess. And we can't ignore it any longer. Rents and house prices have increased faster than incomes for the last 30 years. That's how we have the most unaffordable housing in the Western world. This is not a race you want to win, folks. And you might like Team Red or Team Blue, but it's been happening under both of them. The fact is that neither of them have really addressed this issue, and there's no sign of it letting up. Housing is the number one reason why child poverty has been increasing in this country. Income inequality is actually not as great in New Zealand as in the likes of America. So a lot of the stats you'll see on Facebook don't apply here. It's housing. 80% of the issue is housing, because of course that's what's driving up the cost of living for the poor, higher rents, and that's what's driving up the portfolios of the wealthy, because they're the ones holding all these assets. So, as we said with COVID, we've got to flatten the curve for a generation. We need house prices and rents to stay stable for a generation so that incomes can catch up and housing can be affordable again. Luckily, COVID showed us that if we set our minds to something single-mindedly, we can achieve anything. We're one of the few countries in the world to eradicate COVID from our country. We can deal to this issue if we want to, if it is enough of a priority. But up until now, it hasn't been. So, we need to flatten the curve. It is possible for us to restore housing affordability overnight, but that would involve crashing the housing market, destroying our banking system, probably impoverishing the nation. Not a great idea. So we need to deflate this bubble gently, and it's going to take time. And a lot of people at this point say, this is impossible. House prices have never stayed stable. Well, I've got one word for you. Germany. Look at the bottom of that graph. House prices and rents have been stable in Germany, in real terms, for the last 30 years. That means housing's been getting cheaper there. And it was never that unaffordable in the first place. So, this really can be done if we make it a priority. And by the way, those people who say high house prices are the sign of a successful economy, we've got one word for them too. Germany. One of the most successful economies in the world. Right there. So we've got to stop pretending to ourselves that buying and selling houses off each other is a way to grow our economy. It's just a pyramid scheme. We're just getting future generations to pay for our ever higher asset prices. It makes us feel good. It's not going to make us feel good long term, as Jess said, when future generations can't afford to buy a house. Most people understand the supply side of housing, but the demand side is a bit harder to understand. This is our tax system, and the taxes that get applied to different investments in New Zealand. Now, you don't need to read the graph if you don't want to, but the point to take away is we have some of the highest taxes on other forms of investments in the Western world. That means businesses, KiwiSaver, bank deposits. Some of you are looking confused out there. I thought Scandinavia was a high tax area, or Northern Europe, but not when it comes to investments. I'll come back to that. We have some of the lowest taxes on housing in the Western world, particularly owner-occupied housing. This difference between the two tax rates is the incentive to speculate on property. Ordinary people probably don't know much about this, but you can bet rich people do, because that's why they invest in property, because they know that you are always going to want to own your own home, and therefore the price of their property portfolio is always going to go up. That's why this happens. So as a result, we have more of our money tied up in housing than any other country in the world. No wonder we have some of the highest house prices in the world. Like I said, supply is an issue too, but our tax system is definitely one of the causes. Anyone want to guess what the other side to having more of our money tied up in housing than any other country in the world is? What's the flip side of that? Doesn't go into productive areas. So we have some of the lowest rates of investment in business in the Western world.
Although lots of entrepreneurs will mortgage their home to set up a business.
Yes, they will. Yes, but why is that? Why do our entrepreneurs have to rely on mortgaging their home to set up a business? It's another uniquely Kiwi thing. There's no tax breaks to invest in their business, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's the crucial thing, is that banks won't loan to small businesses, but boy, they'll loan on your house. And that is what is starving our businesses of money. And we wonder why we need to get in foreign companies to invest in New Zealand to build milk factories in Pōkeno. It's not because we don't know how to make baby milk powder. It's because we don't have the money. Because we borrow an incredible amount. We have one of the highest private sector debts in the Western world. And that's all on housing. So not only do we not invest in business, but we're borrowed to the hilt to invest in this market. So, what do we do? Firstly, tax housing the same as other assets. There's a variety of ways of doing that. You can increase the tax on owner-occupied housing and rental housing. You can reduce the tax on other investments. Germany does a bit of both. Second thing we need to do is manage immigration. We've had the highest immigration in the Western world over the past decade. It's not blaming immigrants. I blame the politicians because they've been using it to pump up GDP figures. Gives the finance minister more to announce on budget day. Trouble is, he's usually announcing projects that are needed because of our higher immigration. Higher population means more spending, more things to spend on. Happy to talk about that in the questions later. That's not a straightforward number. Thirdly, we will encourage quality, high density inner city living. We have to, for both housing affordability and for climate change, we have to allow more inner city building, like we see across the road next to the community centre, medium density housing, close to the city centres, because that's the way to provide truly affordable housing where transport costs are much lower. The crucial thing there is investing in local authority infrastructure, and I'll talk about that again a bit later. This is all going to take a generation to fix. In the meantime, we have to give renters stronger rights so they can turn their house into a home. Housing is the number one issue in this country, economically and socially. It's a massive issue to a lot of Kiwis. And from TOP's perspective, housing is a basic form of infrastructure, a human right, not a get-rich-quick scheme. Sadly, that's what it is at the moment. Universal basic income is our second major priority. This is a simple idea, but it takes a lot for people to get their head around because we're used to thinking of the tax system and the benefit system as two different things. They're the same thing. Because it all depends, it all impacts on how much money you got to take home after each hour that you work. So, firstly, what would you do if you had an extra $250 a week? Guaranteed, coming in all the time. Great, all good answers. Buy a house? Yeah, that's because we haven't fixed the last problem. Yeah, would anyone spend more time with their kids, or would anyone have spent more time with their kids if they'd had that when their children were small? Yeah. So lots of things that you can do. Starting a business, good answers. Retraining. So these are all the things that people do when a UBI has been trialled overseas. Contrary to popular belief, people do not stop work and go surfing. And they also do not spend all the money on alcohol and cigarettes. Because people are actually, generally speaking, good with money. The problem is the current welfare system. That is what traps people in poverty. And the UBI removes that trap. So, I'm going to describe the welfare trap to you briefly, using an Indiana Jones analogy. You guys know Indiana Jones? So you're going through people coming off the benefit are a bit like Indiana Jones hacking through the jungle. Inevitably, he comes to some precipice where the ground suddenly opens up before him, right? And there's a massive canyon that he has to get across. Well, that is what it's like for beneficiaries. This is someone coming off the job seeker allowance, which is the same amount as the UBI. What they're coming off on the minimum wage. And as you can see, after working a few hours, they have to start not only paying tax, but losing their benefit. As a result, they get between $2 and $4 an hour for each hour that they work. Would you bother? Would you bother getting up early, paying for transport, all that stuff for between $2 and $4 an hour? And people don't. So we expect them to swing across this canyon to at least 25 hours a week before work actually starts to pay for them. Now, the trouble is that in the modern gig economy, working hours fluctuate, jobs are flexible, unstable, and so sometimes the vine that they're swinging on, love this analogy, it snaps and people fall into the canyon. Even if they think they're going to get to the other side, sometimes they don't. And then they have to go to WINS and pay money back or tell them how much they're earning this week, and it's complex and it's hard, and people get penalised if they don't declare to WINS how much they're going to work.
Like 5 p.m. Friday,
Yeah.
for the work you do not know you're doing on Saturday or Sunday, but you at the same time are expected with WINS to go, yes, I'll take that work, because if you say no, they will say why. Even that they are
Yes.
willing to force a debt against your will and deduct it from you at $10.50 a week till paid off, because they seem to be stuck in the system. We want to have a 7-day week economy, but we have wage declaration system on a 5-day week working economy. And no politician has ever wanted to openly address that.
Yes, thank you, sir. And we'll capture that on video afterwards, if you're happy to do that. Sadly, we couldn't get the camera and microphone to you in time for that. But no, you did right. And another massive problem with our welfare system is that we have to pay people to snoop around working out who you're sleeping with. Right? All of these things are removed with a UBI. Oh, by the way, fun fact, if the Greens guaranteed minimum income comes in, this canyon opens up to 36 hours. So we're expecting people to swing across into full-time work from the benefit, right across that canyon. So it is, it's an even bigger challenge.
What's happening at hour 50 in that last slide?
At hour 50.
After 50 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, right, it goes down again because you go to another tax rate, a higher tax rate. Yeah, you go from 17 cents to 30 cents. So this is taking into account tax and abatement. It's both of them together, right? So, our UBI proposal, this is what it looks like. A flat line, every hour they work, you keep. It really smooths out all of those bumps in the system. So the real winners from a UBI are the working poor. Someone on the minimum wage has taken over the living wage. By the way, what's the major driver of the cost of living in New Zealand? Housing. Why are we expecting business to pay for the cost of living because of our crazy housing market? The living wage. I mean, don't get me wrong. People should be paid enough to live on. Absolutely.
Yes.
But why do we expect businesses to pick up their tab when they're already picking up the tab from being starved from capital because of our housing market? It's a double whammy. So, someone on the minimum wage would be earning more than the living wage if they were receiving the UBI. And the benefit gets gradually reduced the more you earn because of the flat tax. Now remember, there are big changes on the way. COVID is just giving us an insight into what's coming down the pipeline in terms of the job market. People moving in and out of work, a more unstable job market, having to start businesses, retrain. With artificial intelligence and automation, in the next decade, 15% of people, 1 in 8 of you, are going to lose your job due to artificial intelligence or automation. That's what the World Economic Forum projection is. 1 in 8 of you. Now, I'm not predicting widespread unemployment. You will get another job, or you'll start a business, but it will involve retraining. And the idea of a 40-hour job a week for life is gone. Millennials get this. 40% of millennials have more than one gig. The gig economy is here. Baby boomers just don't see it yet. Just talk to your children and you'll find out what they do to get by. So, the idea of the UBI is that you've always got that security of income through those ups and downs, through the retraining, through the starting a business, all without having to crawl through the doors of WINS, which is dehumanizing and complicated. So, how do we pay for it? Flat tax of 33% pays for most of it. It's a massive simplification of our tax and welfare system. And it leaves everyone better off. A big number of the savings come from reduced bureaucracy and being able to get rid of other things like working for families, all that sort of stuff. Reduced bureaucracy is huge. Billions of dollars spent in Ministry for Social Development and IRD. Cynically, supposedly their job is to help you get what you're entitled to, but cynically I would say their job is to stop you from getting what you're entitled to. All that complicated paperwork. Believe me, the Treasury doesn't mind when people don't get what they're entitled to. And we know that even the most simple system like working for families, a third of people don't get what they're entitled to. Imagine what the numbers are like for benefits. So, the last line, called dynamic benefits, it's an economic term, forgive me for that. What does that mean? When UBI has been trialled overseas, we see 4 major benefits come through. Firstly, beneficiaries work more because there's no poverty trap. They pay tax, government wins. Easy. Secondly, people retrain. If they're not working, they retrain. That means they earn more over time, pay more tax, government wins. Thirdly, the people that don't work are often staying at home looking after their kids. Proven, if you're looking after your kids up until at least age 3, better lifetime outcomes, higher incomes, less health problems, better education outcomes, less time in jail, all that sort of stuff. Government wins. Fourthly, we know from experiments that when you take wins out of the equation, give people the same amount of money, but just take wins out of the equation, take the paperwork out of the equation, restore people's dignity, take the stigma away, mental health problems drop by 1/3. By the way, when mental health problems drop by 1/3, substance abuse problems dropped by about half. Less alcohol, less pee, less rehab needed, less crime, all of that stuff. So, those benefits, if those benefits that we've seen in overseas experiments come through, that's worth about $8 billion a year. If they don't come through, we have a property tax as a backup plan. Third focus, smart small business. Labor's been the voice of unions and workers for a long time, National the voice of big business, but in the middle there's small business, who are a little bit like workers and a little bit like business owners, because they're at the coalface with their workers, right? With their employees. And for a long time they've been politically homeless. 500,000 small businesses in this country, generating tax revenue, generating jobs, and they haven't had a voice. So we want to give it to them. Here's what we want to do for small business: abolish provisional tax.
Yay. Yes. That's a killer.
Yeah. It's designed for big business, it's complex, it's punitive, and this is part of a much broader suite of changes that we want to make it easier for small business to interact with government. Removing fringe benefit tax on low emissions vehicles. You can get fringe benefit tax off if you have a double cab ute. Anyone heard of this low carbon economy we're supposed to be moving to? So why don't we remove fringe benefit tax there too? Get those businesses out there, buying the low emissions vehicles, then they'll filter through to the second-hand market down the line for us plebs to drive. Thirdly, grants for small businesses to uptake digital technology, energy and resource efficiency. Again, this is proven, it's been trialled overseas, it's been proven. Reduces cost, more money kept in the business's pockets, and improved environmental outcomes. It's a win-win. So that's the obvious place to start. Like I said, Europe's been doing this sort of stuff for decades. Rein in big business with, for example, making them pay on time. Lots of small businesses are basically the creditors. They're playing the bank for large businesses because they delay paying for sometimes up to 3 months. Not cool. On top of that, you may have noticed we have the weakest competition laws in the Western world. Ever wondered why we get screwed by banks, supermarkets, power companies, petrol stations, building supplies?
ComCom has no teeth.
The Commerce Commission has no teeth, and our competition legislation is stuck in the 90s, desperately needing an overhaul to get it up to best practice. So, lots we can do there. Last point, encourage productive investment by shifting it away from housing, as I've already discussed. Lastly, our climate-friendly recovery. Like I said before, the investment that the next government is going to be making is the biggest that you will see in your lifetime. Yeah, probably the biggest in 100 years.
Make ladies more friendly to men.
Sorry?
Does that mean making ladies more friendly to men?
Climate-friendly recovery? No, I'm talking about the COVID recovery, the COVID-19 recovery, and what we're trying to do is make sure that the investments we make are actually going to allow us to meet our emissions reductions targets, which is the big challenge we have in the next 3 decades. This is all going to be decided in the next 3 years based on the infrastructure we build. Meanwhile, politicians are using this opportunity to just buy votes. And again, it's not like one side is better than another. They all have their pet projects. Sure, Winston's probably the worst, trying to buy Northland. I don't mean Northland and Wellington, I mean North, yeah. But every political party has their pet projects. National wants to tunnel through the Brynderwyns. The Greens want to put solar panels on everyone's roof. Now don't get me wrong, I have no problem with solar panels. They will be part of the future of energy generation. But are they the biggest issue we face right now? When is peak electricity demand in New Zealand?
With the night.
About now, exactly now. 7 p.m. in the middle of winter when everyone gets home and switches on their heat pump and boils the potatoes. Now, can you have a look out the door and tell me any issues you see with solar panels at this point in time? Sorry?
Only night, but there's no sun.
There's no sun. And we're probably a decade off batteries being cost competitive, right? So yes, solar will be part of the long-term mix, particularly in Northland and East Coast. But betting entirely on that horse is crazy. The most cost-effective investment that we can make right now is in energy efficiency. I've already talked about that with businesses, but we've got to get that in our households as well. Again, Europe's been doing this for 2 decades. There's money lying around on the floor. Well, more to the point, it's leaking through our walls and under our doors. Making our homes energy efficient and our businesses energy efficient is far and away the best thing we can do for our pockets and for the climate. That has to be the priority. I know it's not sexy, but that's actually what the evidence says. So for the next decade, that needs to be our focus. We need to plant erosion-prone land with native trees. Absolutely. We don't need to cover the country in pines.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Right tree in the right place. Nothing against forestry, but using pine forestry to offset, to cover our blushes with with fossil fuel emissions is stupid. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, the government's premier environmental advisor, said a couple of years ago, folks, this is stupid. Government, next day, 1 billion trees. Because this is the only thing that the coalition government can agree on, is planting more pine trees. That's...
Does that produce compared to using our land productively?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the big issue in a lot of regions right now is, they are concerned about losing jobs from productive land being locked up in carbon forestry. And absolutely, we should be planting our erosion-prone land, quick, smart, and that will be a massive store of carbon. But we don't need to go planting pine everywhere. I've already talked about the rather disgusting, corrupt vote buying that's going on with infrastructure spending at the moment. We need to be actually producing business cases for these billion-dollar projects.
Yeah.
And those business cases, if you haven't seen Jessica's video on this, it's on Facebook, it's hilarious. Go to the top Facebook page and scroll down. It's been reposted lately in response to National's attempt to buy our votes. All these projects should have business cases, and those business cases should look at the very least, the economic impact. Is it going to help us work smarter in the future? And the environmental impact. Is it going to help us meet our emissions reductions targets? At the very least. But at the moment, we're leaving these decisions up to politicians. And it's gross. What would we be funding instead? It's difficult to know until the business cases are actually done. But we do have some ideas of infrastructure projects that are being missed out at the moment. What about broadband and cell phone connections? Helping, particularly in rural areas, helping connect those. We've seen how important that was with COVID. We know that freight could be moved to electric rail. We know that some remote rural communities could be going off-grid completely. We know that natural infrastructure like wetlands are important. But like I said before, probably the most important investment that New Zealand should be making in the next decade is sorting out funding of local authorities. Because we have to give local authorities the money and the incentive to allow them to build up around their city centres and public and active transport networks. So the centre of Johnsonville would be a great place for more medium density housing. The trouble is that infrastructure is groaning and local authorities don't have the money to fix it. They have 40% of the infrastructure in this country, 7% of the revenue to deal with that infrastructure. That is why water pipes and poo pipes are bursting in this city. And it needs sorting out. Finally, to pay all that back, we're going to need to signal that the carbon price is going to keep increasing over time. Businesses need to know that we're going to help them invest now to reduce their emissions, but in the future, that carbon price will be hitting $100 a tonne before too long. Currently, it's 30. And for it to actually, before we're going to see anyone actually do anything to reduce emissions, it needs to hit 60 or 70 bucks a tonne. Because otherwise, what we're going to see over the next 3-5 years with the projected carbon prices that the government are talking about, we'll just see pine trees getting planted. That's all you'll see. No real action on reducing emissions, just more pine trees. I really don't think that is the long-term vision that Kiwis want for their country. So, here's a quick taste of what our campaign will look like in 2020. I'm not sure if the sound is going to work on this. Can you hear that? Oh, where's it coming out? Projector.
Everyone has fought their own little battles, and that's kind of the point.
Hang on a second, I'm going to turn it up.
We don't know the battles that other people are facing.
When I was 18 in these days, I would be trying to hide the fact and live my life, but in the background there'd be the anxiety of knowing that I'm going to pick up all
Can you
of
hear
the
that?
problems that the previous generation
Oh,
has
is it
been
there?
before our generation.
Maybe like 20 years,
No.
30 years, I have a house to myself. They're like 1 million, 4 million, right?
People don't appreciate how hard it is to even navigate the welfare system.
The world is now closer than it was. It's acting as a global society, and that society tends to move towards the selfishness of power, which always means the environment takes second place, human rights take second place, and the world just becomes an ugly place to live.
Yeah, I was bringing them that have finance for about 30 years.
We have to pay for them, we have to survive them, and we have to build a future for our children somehow.
So that was the technical issue we were trying to sort out before we started, but didn't get it done in time. So, the whole idea of that is to tell your stories about how the housing crisis is affecting you, about how any interactions you have with the benefit system or working for families, or the tax system, and how that could be simplified. To hear your stories about owning a business, running a business, and the complex paperwork that you have to deal with. To hear about your hopes for the future in terms of what sort of country we can leave future generations. So, that campaign will be launched tomorrow night at our campaign launch, which is in Meow Bar in town. You're all welcome to come along. At 5:30 tomorrow, we'll be launching our campaign, and then you'll see it on social media after that. And we will be inviting you to put up your stories as well. So fantastic rants such as we heard from the man before. Sam, kia ora.
A lot more people in here do know who I am.
Yeah, we all know
Nice,
Sam.
nice. And that's the sort of stuff we want to see on social media. People talking about those sorts of issues that they're facing. I don't know if you heard the young gentleman on that presentation, but he said, I'm going to be having flatmates for 30 or 40 years. And that realistically is his future right now. So hearing stories like that from people will be a big part of our campaign, and we encourage you to share yours on social media as well. This is what our billboards look like. You might have seen, anyone seen Jess's billboards? Looking fantastic. Except, well, you mean when the face got cut out? Yeah. Apparently, that was someone who couldn't...
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not going to say?
I didn't want to reveal why.
Apparently, there's a reason for
It
that.
wasn't personal,
It
is
wasn't
all I'll
personal.
say.
No. Yes, and this is what, the sort of stuff we'll be doing on social media to get our message out. So that's a hint of what we'll be announcing tomorrow night. Like I said, feel free to come along. Meow Bar in town at 5:30 p.m. Now is your chance to ask questions of myself and Jess. I'm going to come back up here, Jess. And we have James with a microphone somewhere, if you want to turn that on.
Got it. You said hold it down.
Yeah, and then the light will come on.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Perfect. All right, we've got a question over here.
Is the UBI going to be tagged to inflation? Like, is it going to be 250 forever, or at the whims of politicians say, well, next year we'll put it up to 270 or 220? How's that going to be kept in place with inflation?
Yeah, the idea would be to tag it to incomes, average incomes. Yeah.
So would that be legislated and we'll know in advance? So it doesn't have to be passed to go up or down.
Yes, that would be the idea. Absolutely.
Yeah, tracked by votes, right?
Yeah.
Just 3 quick things. First, why do you keep on saying universal basic income, whereas in basic income circles they're referring as basic income, guy standing refers to the universal out. Second thing was, are there top-ups, on top of the basic income? Well, that's good. And the third thing is, I'm really disappointed to see when you're writing about basic income, if you are involved in coalition talks, you'll go back to your previous policy. Well, I like the one you've got at the moment, I don't like your previous one that you had for us, so I'm just a little disappointed about that.
So definitely top-ups. So I can't answer the question about why we say universal basic income rather than basic income.
And I understand where you're coming from Guy Standing, but the term UBI has gained real traction, perhaps mostly on Facebook as a response to...
I think I could disagree, and internationally, I think basic income. Yeah, internationally, but I don't want to argue about that.
So yes, top-ups. So the idea is that the universal basic income replaces lower benefits, but there are some people who aren't going to be able to work and can't live off $250 a week. So there would be top-ups, and those people unfortunately will still have to interact with MSD. I do think there are probably a lot of people who will opt not to do that because they can work without those abatement rates. Oh yeah, so our previous policy, yes, it is on our website, and I think that just recognises that if we were in a position where we couldn't get the entire UBI across, we understand that families of young children are the people who the evidence shows have the highest need. I think that's all that signifies.
It's not such a good policy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and we will be pushing for the full universal basic income. Absolutely. Oh.
Hi, I've never been on TV before, and probably what I'm about to say, I'm very biased because my mum's one of the politicians. I
Can't hear them.
Oh,
Can't hear because people can see us. Come on.
okay.
Oh, sorry, did that make it worse?
No, it's okay. I don't know much about politics, but I know a lot of things about what my mum thinks, and I think that talk can really make a difference.
Let's get a campaign video with that in it.
Yeah. So first to declare, I have a property portfolio with my husband, but not in rental accommodation. I'm in corporate. But one of the things I feel quite strongly about is the number of people, middle class people, who are taking money from government through the what's it called, the income related rent subsidy, IRRS. But that might still need to happen, mightn't it? But you'd have people with a UBI, but they still might need to have some rental subsidy until you get the curve down.
You mean accommodation supplement?
Yeah, they have that. And to me, people who say, oh, I've got 10 houses and, I just get all this money from government.
Yeah. Accommodation supplement is crazy. Like, we pay private landlords a subsidy, which of course keeps pushing the price of rents up, which means that people can't afford them, which means we need to increase the subsidy. It's sorry?
Well, they're effectively doing what the state's doing instead of having house in New Zealand or paying a warrant.
Yes, they are. I mean, but in a supply limited market, it's crazy.
Temporary additional support is the next top up after the accommodation supplement, and that is actually the biggest driver to stopping people go to work, because in, I think, this electorate we're in area 2, and pretty much if you're a single person, if you pay more than $230 a week, you're maxed out your accommodation, and any additional support they will pay, and you have a dollar for dollar deduction rate, plus if you're paying tax on that, that is 17 cents on the dollar, and if you've got a student loan, it's another 12 cents.
So that's 129%. Oh, 133% tax rate. Oh, that's good. What I would say about accommodation supplement, $2 billion a year we spend on this in order to basically subsidise rents. What most European countries do is have a much bigger community housing sector. So I hear what you're saying, that this is doing what we would do with Housing New Zealand, but actually in Europe they have community-based organisations that own large tracts of housing, and not only do they do social housing, but they do affordable rental as well. So they're competing with the private sector, and that is something that we are talking about as part of our housing policy, is actively growing our community housing sector so that we have a whole bunch of houses permanently rented out in terms of affordable housing.
Hi, I just want to know what your policy is on the ageing population that require care either in their own homes or in facilities, and also on the workforce needed to provide that care.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So that's a great question. In general, what I would say is that we need to have a conversation with our older generations about the balance of treatment versus care in our health system. Because our health system spends a lot of money on the last year of people's lives. And that money would go a lot further in a care type situation. I totally acknowledge that there are real issues with funding aged care. I think people should be, this is what they have done in some overseas countries, right? They have specialist nurses, which when someone is looking like they are nearing their end of life, specialist nurses come in and have a sit down with the family and have quite a big conversation about how they want this whole thing to go. And these nurses have the ability to pull budget from what would be spent on treatment and instead to give them high quality care. And I think we need to be having that sort of conversation in New Zealand, because it's pretty clear at the moment, we're not as bad as America, but it's pretty clear that we're spending a lot of money trying to keep people alive in the last year of life, and not all of it is well spent. Where do you get the care from? Oh, you mean so the staffing side. Again, I think this is quite a big conversation that we need to have as a country, because in general it's very clear that subsequent governments have been using immigration to keep wages down amongst our lower skilled workers, right? Now, generally speaking, I think that's a bad idea. Let the wages rise. Let there be shortages in labour, so that lower income people get paid more. Now, when it comes to aged care, that's a massive issue because it's mostly government funded. And so if we were to do that, then we would need to pump up the funding in the public sector. So yeah, there's quite a big national conversation to be had on migration generally, I think, immigration generally, but that one in particular is a gnarly issue.
Just moving on from there just a little bit into the question, I think that in many respects we're past the conversation on aged care. We've had the conversation now for years, and the solutions are well known by talking to the right people. And I think that that's where it needs to be, because the more you talk about it, the less it's going to happen and the longer it's going to take. And there's going to be another generation that goes into care. But my real question is slightly different. I haven't heard you mention once yet about protecting our borders in COVID-19, which I think is the most important issue in this country at the moment. Because if we don't protect the borders and there aren't guarantees from politicians and political parties, then I think you're fighting a losing battle. So have you got a policy on it or not?
Let me refer to your first point first. The conversation I'm talking about having is about funding, is about shifting funding from treatment to care. I agree with what you're saying, that the solutions are well known in aged care, but we need to get the money from somewhere. And I think that is the obvious place that it needs to come from. I mean, in terms of border protection for COVID-19, I mean, I think the government's done a good job. And I don't know what Jess thinks on that particular topic, but personally, TOP isn't trying to be the majority in government. We want to be the coalition partner sitting at the table working with them. And like I said, I think they're doing a good job. We carry on as we're going now. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think I agree. And we don't, I might be on risky ground here because we don't have policy on this, but I do think we need to just be a little bit careful on this populist issue of charging people for their quarantine.
I agree.
The thing I worry about there, apart from whether it's legal, is I think once you have people paying thousands of dollars, then I think there will be a lot of people who feel a lot more resentful and a lot less cooperative. So I think we want to tread really carefully there.
Yeah, and good point, Jess. And I think on that topic, I mean, if people are coming back, people who are going on holiday or are coming here to be students or whatever, then of course let's charge them. But Kiwis that are coming home that want to contribute to this country, why the hell would we charge them?
I don't think that was the question.
Right.
The question was, are you going to continue to protect the border?
Yes.
Not have,
and like I said, the answer is yes. Yes.
Or some other policy that says we're going to have students coming back, for example. We need to protect the border.
Agreed. I think the government's done a good job, and we would support them to continue to do so. Yes?
It's in the hands of the military now.
That leads nicely into the question of who would you be willing to partner with in government?
So we're willing to work with Labour or National, and at the moment, it looks like it's going to be Labour. I mean, do you want to answer that?
Just bargaining, you want to talk about bargaining?
Oh, right, yeah. So I mean, the important thing about being willing to work with either Labour or National is because we've seen from New Zealand First in the last coalition that the party that's in the centre has the bargaining power. So, you know, if you look at the Greens, we've got a $100 million sort of green investment fund, which has not really been touched, and New Zealand First that got $3 billion for whatever the heck they want. So that's quite simply 30 times the bargaining power. So being in that position where you are willing and able to work with either side is really important for getting the things done that we think need to happen for this country.
And that's an appropriate time to point out, actually, that, this is the conversation you should be having with the people of Ōhāriu. Anyone that you meet, your party vote is what decides who wins the election. Okay? In this electorate, I don't care if people party vote top. Sure, it's great. But I want them to vote for Jess, because I want her in Parliament. Right? Yes. The question is, who do you want representing this electorate? Doesn't make any difference to the outcome of the election, whether that is Jess or Greg O'Connor, because Labour will get the same number of MPs either way. Yeah? Anne?
There's been a bit of unseemly behaviour in recent days by mainly blue politicians so far, but also a red one. Do you think we need a democracy reset?
Very good question, Anne. I think we do need a democracy reset. I mean, honestly, one of the things I'm really passionate about is making. I want our politicians to be people that New Zealanders can admire, and I don't know if there is a lot. You know, there are some who are widely admired. Not naming any names, but you know, there are a lot who are really not worthy of the position. So I guess I would be encouraging people, not just in Ōhāriu, but everywhere, to really consider the character of the people they are voting for. I kind of think it's a little bit like the voters. It's like we're in Hogwarts and you need to put a sorting hat on us and figure out whether we're in there because we're Slytherins who can be good people but are mostly interested in. Is anyone with me on this? Yeah. who are more ambitious and cunning, or whether they are Gryffindors who are courageous and want the best, or you know. Hufflepuffs are great too. But actually, I have found that politics is riddled with Slytherins, and they're not all bad. But you know, this is what I get told all the time is. The way to win Ōhāriu is to go to each different suburb and tell them the thing that they want to hear. Don't worry if the thing you tell the people in Tawa is different from what you tell the people in Wellington. They probably won't talk to each other. So that's what you need to do to get in, and getting in is all that matters. Getting the most votes is all that matters. Don't do anything that takes more than a couple of sentences to explain. People won't go for that. Even if it's a great policy, don't talk about it. Sound bites, tell people they want to hear. And this is the advice I get from seasoned politicians. And it is crap, and I hate it, and I think it's disgusting.
Do you want to talk about the public sector as well, just briefly, given your experience?
So yeah, I mean, I've been a public servant for about 15 years, I think, and you know, I'm quite proud to be a public servant, although it is, you know, really frustrating at times. But I do think, were you thinking about the political?
interference.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of public servants are put in really difficult situations regularly by their ministers, being asked to do things that are really not in the spirit of public service, as we like to say. So I guess, part of our democracy reset is about honouring the public serviceness of public servants, politically neutral. It's weird for me to say this as someone who's standing for Parliament, but the political neutrality. Public servants are there to serve the people of New Zealand and to carry out the lawful instructions of their ministers. But quite often public servants are put in really compromised positions.
Can I ask?
Sorry, we're going to the back.
How are you going to be able to help the industries such as hospitality and tourism by closing the border for 2 years and not allowing them to say Fiji, that is almost COVID-free, or the Pacific Islands? That would be far better than fully closing the border, where we'd lose thousands and thousands of jobs.
Obviously tourism is the sector that's hardest impacted by COVID and the border closures. This is another reason we'd like to see a UBI, because it encourages those workers, those people into other industries rather than waiting around for the borders to reopen, even if they're moving temporarily into those other sectors. Yes, it would be great to have bubbles with foreign countries if we can be assured that they are COVID free. There's been a lot of talk about the Aussie bubble, but as we can see, that doesn't look like it's going to settle down anytime soon. So, theoretically, happy to explore overseas bubbles with overseas countries, but practically, with the exception of, as you say, a few Pacific Islands, which are pretty tiny, it doesn't look likely anytime soon.
Hey Jeff, just be good to get your perspective from your office. The 5% threshold, like how you guys track in, and what are the chances? Is I guess what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, we are obviously, we don't have our sugar daddy anymore, as we like to say, and so we are. Our campaign is building. We're focused on building from here. The last poll had us at 1.5%, which is great. So that's all positive, and we have after our campaign launch, that's really when the assault begins for us in terms of our budget and all that sort of stuff. So absolutely, the 5% is a massive challenge. That's why we are focusing on Ōhāriu so much, and we're putting so much effort into Jess's campaign. And if, like I said in a few minutes, if anyone wants to get involved in that campaign, then Jess will let you know where to talk to. We are a member-led organisation now, so if you want us to do more, you can volunteer, you can donate. We're entirely powered by people power. Our average donation in 2019 was $25. We had more donations, more people donating to us than all the other political parties in Parliament combined. So we truly are a movement. And that means that we're not beholden to any particular funders with vested interests to have a callback to the democracy issue, which is, that is a massive issue. The return on investment from the racing industry in Winston Peters is extraordinary. That investment they made into his campaign has netted them $70 million of the last budget. It's crazy. Anyway, that's the sort of issues that we're dealing with. Yes, sir.
Okay. One of the big issues we have with housing, and councils are part of the problem. They can only get most of their income from rates. Which encourages property price speculation, because the higher the property's worth, the more rates they get, regardless of whether there's the means for them to pay it. How do we look at shifting the redistribution of income for those councils as well? Because rates is currently a broken model.
Yeah, totally agree. And this needs a full review, but our proposal in the meantime is to give local authorities the GST back from new buildings. Okay, so there's been a lot of talk in recent days about giving them back the GST on rates, but actually the GST on new buildings is about 2.5 times that, so that's the kind of money that's needed to fix local authority funding. It's about a $2 billion a year deficit that Infrastructure New Zealand says we need to invest. So that's the kind of scope that we're talking about. Well, another few quick questions and then we're going to wrap up, folks.
Hi Jeff, I've been doing what the government's asked me to do and spending any surplus cash I've got at the moment, and I've had a number of tradespeople through the house to do capital works improvements, and every time I've asked them what they're going to do, we've got a lot of bereft ex-national supporters out there who don't know who to vote for because they've had enough of national. And this is small business people, self-employed, pretty disenchanted with what they were offered during COVID when they're one-man bands. And I've suggested TOP every time. How does TOP as a movement access those small businesses and tell them how good the deal is on what TOP is promoting? Anyone in this room wanting to pull together the local business people and have a real talk about how small business could be supported?
Thanks, Barbara. Our just due to budget, really, our focus is really going to be online. So we are targeting small business through LinkedIn and through Facebook, and so we will be hammering those with those messages that you saw there. So.
Democracy recess has certainly been applied to New Zealand because now, the recess, we now have ladies leading on top in the Labour Party and in the Labour Party and the Conservative Party we have a Labour. Now, does the top want to apply the same insofar as having a lady leading the top party?
Andy and I have this conversation almost every week. and I thought we had a rule that we didn't talk about gender politics, you and I. But no, very, very happy with Jeff as the leader of our party, and he has a lot of strong women in the team supportive.
Yes, yeah, we've got Jess and our deputy leader Shai, who they're fantastic, role models within the party. Sir.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? Do you have any data on per capita of public servants versus population? Because I was told recently we've got over 33,000 public servants in New Zealand. I find that quite astounding, really. When we start adding up all the regional councils and the city councils, we seem to be very, very top-heavy in bureaucracy. I don't know what your thoughts are.
When you say top-heavy, do you just mean bureaucratic-heavy? Okay. Because actually, one of the interesting things about New Zealand is we are one of the most centralised governments in the world. So actually, our local government is very small compared to overseas. So our central government, you're probably right, is quite bureaucratic heavy, but I don't think that's the case for local government. Yeah.
Does that figure include nurses, teachers?
I'm assuming not. No. I wouldn't think so.
It doesn't.
I have an answer for that.
The other?
There are 400,000 government employees in New Zealand, and about 5% of them are local government level.
Yeah, 5% of local government. Out of 400,000. Yeah. So that really that's very low internationally. I don't know off the top of my head about the total bureaucrat level compared to overseas, but I do know New Zealand's very centralised compared to the rest of the world. Yeah.
Is it still TOP's policy to change the flag of New Zealand?
That never was our policy. That was Gareth wading in with his opinion on everything. But we do think we should be kickstarting a conversation about a constitution. and with a review to refreshing our constitution, having a written constitution by 2040. So we could start that journey by entrenching the Bill of Rights tomorrow, which makes sure that you guys all have rights. Wouldn't that be nice? Woo! Yes. But longer term, we do need to have a much broader conversation about how we honour the treaty and what sort of rights we want to entrench, and how do we acknowledge our love of the environment in our constitution. That's a much longer term conversation. We'd like to have that done by 2040, based on a constitution which really sets out what is unique about Aotearoa New Zealand. Yes.
You probably don't want any more questions, but just on your comment about the public service, I have a business in Wellington, and most of my clients were 60% of my clients were public service, but they introduced this whole procurement model to introduce so-called efficiency, and that killed the business. I closed it, 20 staff gone, didn't work, and now I'm actually just working for another woman. She's set up a business in Wellington, she's gone international, she's got offices in London, Sydney, works in New York. She says that in Wellington, she can hardly afford to pay staff because government has pushed salaries up so high, and now government is actually headhunting her staff at a 30-40% increase in salary because they want people on their books as contractors or staff, not as consultants, because consultants are bad. And so there is this crazy, crazy system going on where government's killing business and killing efficiency and killing productivity just so that it looks good on the books.
The government procurement panel is a mess, totally agree, we need to get rid of it. Yeah. I don't know if you have a view on... Yeah.
I guess the only thing I'd add to that is that that's where I think when you have sort of really simple measures of progress, like we've capped the number of public servants. Well, you haven't really. You've just contractors. Yeah, you've got rid of a whole lot of them and hired them back as contractors on higher rates. Yeah. It's just ridiculous. So those sort of, I just would encourage people to be really wary of those sound bites about, what we've done about the size of the public service and things like that, because a lot of it is just smoke and mirrors. Yeah.
That's the classic sort of, National puts a cap on public service numbers so consultants go through the roof. Labor comes in and they want to get rid of consultants, so they hire them all back, and it's just like, one of the great yo-yos of Wellington. Okay, folks, hey look, Jess and I, 2 more questions? Okay, well, very quickly.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could explain, you were saying that you would remove provisional tax. Does that mean that there would be no income tax on businesses? And the other question was how you would plan to implement that 33% tax which you talked about.
Yeah, okay, so getting rid of provisional tax doesn't mean the businesses don't pay the tax. It just means they pay their tax at the end of the year when they know how much money they actually have. Not in advance. Yeah.
And then you get penalised if you do too well.
Exactly, and well, if you underpay provisional tax, you get penalised at a 7% charge. If you overpay, you get something like 0.5%. Oh, it's 0, is it? Right, yeah. So it's a real money-making exercise on behalf of IRD.
That actually is something that actually is available to small businesses, which helps them to manage their cash flow a bit better.
Yeah, that has just come in for COVID, is my understanding. No? Oh, it was before that. Okay, right. On the 32%, what we're talking about is a flat tax. So you just get rid of all the tax rates. So there's no need for income splitting. There's no need for you to do a tax return at the end of the year. Nothing. Just have a very simple 33% flat tax and you get $250 a week through the UBI. It's a massive simplification of the tax and welfare system. Yeah?
What are the accountants going to do?
Exactly.
Just a question on behalf of my partner who's at home with the kids. A property tax question, of course, because he's an accountant.
For the property plan, would it not be better to do a progressive tax based on property's capital value, as this would have added benefits of discouraging excess borrowing and encouraging people to invest in smaller, more efficient homes for New Zealand?
I mean, and your partner's an accountant?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I mean, usually ideas like this tend to end up with unintended consequences with people trying to game the system. So will it just mean that you'll buy 2 properties next to each other and call them separate? You know what I mean? I would have thought that this sort of, well, when you look at how this property tax impacts, we're talking about the top 20% of society that really pay most of this, right? Kiwis are always like, oh, don't tax my property. My goodness, what are you talking about? But actually, when you run the numbers, if we're redistributing this to people, then the vast majority of people are better off. The top 20% have 60% of the assets in this country. So they're the ones that are going to be paying most of this tax. And so I would imagine this tax will be hitting them the most. It's a great incentive to actually develop your land. This area, sort of northwestern Wellington, on the fringes, there's about 2 or 3 property owners that are stopping Wellington expanding. Land bankers. Your Johnsonville Mall, land banker. Why are they sitting on that dung heap? Not improving it. It's because they're banking the land. Actually, putting a property tax on them puts a fire underneath them to actually develop the land and get on with it, or sell it and get off. So that is the real driver behind that, to move on and start using this land efficiently and effectively. You got any rants you want to do about the mall?
About the commercial slumlords across the road. I mean, I guess my issue with the mall, touching all over the